All right, people, it's now 4 p.m. East African time, 2 p.m. Nigerian time, 1 p.m. GMT time. And I take this opportunity to officially welcome you to the webinar today. And while we are still waiting for more people to join us, I kindly request if you could type in the chat box your names and where you're joining us from. And then let's just take a few extra minutes to wait for more people to join us, and then we'll kick it off. But please feel free to share with us your names and where you're joining from. Hello, Begonia. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Good to see and have you here joining us from Chile and currently in the Netherlands. So hello too, welcome. Hello, Brittany. Joining us from Australia, but you're from the US. We also appreciate your presence today. And we are also excited for the discussion. So we're looking forward to a very interactive one. Thank you for joining us. Hello, Hannah Jones from the USA. Thank you again for joining us. Welcome and good morning to you. Hello, thank you, Dorothy, for joining us from Nairobi. Hello, Laura Mukhwana, also joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much for creating the time for this. All right, people, at this juncture, I wish to again welcome everyone to this session today. We're discussing rather the role of intergenerational approaches to the implementation of nature-based solutions, and especially to tackling the ecological and climate crisis in the world, but specifically in Africa. And we are taking the lens of how everyone can become a part of all this and how we can put our joint efforts towards curbing both crises. So thank you so much for the new participants who are just joining. Welcome again. Feel free to make good use of the chat box to share with us your names and where you're joining us from. And at this point, I wish to introduce my name. I'm Kaluki Paul Mutuku. I'm with Youth for Nature, representing the Africa Regional UN Group. And I'll be one of your moderators for the session today. And I will let my other moderator join. But before that, hello, Africa, hello, world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us from. We trust that you're keeping safe during these tough COVID-19 times. And we trust that you're keeping your hopes high in terms of helping us and helping the world and nature heal, specifically during this time, but also for our common goal into the future. So welcome to our session today about the role of people and the different generations towards curbing the climate and the ecological crisis, but also having an intergenerational dialogue while addressing the societal challenges that we're facing today. And maybe before we continue, let me highlight some few guidelines that we need to just observe as we are continuing. Please, when you're joining, if you're not a speaker or you're moderator, try to at least stay on mute, both on your cameras and also on your audio, to ensure we have the best quality of our video today. Also, while the conversation is going on and while the speakers are making their presentations to us, please feel free to use the chat box to the bottom right of your device and key in your questions, your comments, your insights, and all that, and we'll be able to read them at the end of the session. And also, please note that we are recording this session, and it will be made available on our social media platforms after the session, or maybe a few days after the session. So let me allow my co-moderator to also introduce himself before we get to it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elujulo from Nigeria, and I'm so glad to see you all joining this webinar. We are so happy to have you with us here. I said again, I'm calling in from Nigeria. So good, it's afternoon here. So good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to you all. Like Paul initially mentioned, the webinar is going to be about intergenerational approach to combating planetary emergencies with Africa in focus. And we have seasoned experts in this sector, in this change-making space, to share their experiences and best practices with us. And we hope that at the end of the webinar, for whatever reasons that you decided to join this webinar, we all hope that the objectives will be fulfilled at the end of the webinar. So thank you once again for joining our webinar, and we look forward to engaging with you beyond this webinar even. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Elujulo. And just at this juncture, let me just start sharing my screen, because we are mostly now dealing with different experts in the field who are ready to share the diverse perspectives and areas of engagement that they are working on, and how we can find the links in these works in terms of the expertise, but also the ages and the regions that we all come from. So just a moment as I start my screen. Elujulo, if you can confirm that my slide is being shared down.
Yes, it's been shared.
Okay, thank you so much.
Still loading.
It's still loading. Okay, sorry. You're good to go. All right. So, like we mentioned, we are from Youth for Nature, and this is our Africa webinar. Of course, we are always being supported by Nature for Climate, which is a group of conservation organizations that also support conservation work around the world. And we happen to be a part of Nature for Climate movement. Briefly about our agenda, we are going to briefly introduce Youth for Nature, and then get to the topic introduction about the theme for today. And then we'll get a slot of about 30 minutes or so for our speakers to make their presentations. And then we'll get to the active session where we hear from you, our participants, and actually get to hear feedback regarding the topics and also the questions that you might have to the speakers. And of course, finally, we'll try to make available information on how you can get to interact and know more about Youth for Nature, and also engage in our works. So shortly, to introduce Youth for Nature, for those of us who are new to our platforms, we are an international youth-led organization that is advocating for nature-based solutions, or solutions to the climate and ecological crisis. And we have a key message that is in the search for solutions to the climate change, rather the climate crisis. Our leaders, especially politicians or political leaders, cannot forget young people. They cannot forget frontline and marginalized communities, and they cannot forget the role of nature in all this. and we are guided by 3 missions. That I will read. The first one is actually to mobilize young people to advocate for political leaders to deliver up to 30% of all required climate solutions needed by 2030 using nature-based solutions. And the second mission that we go with is the elevation of youth voices by giving them a platform to share their stories and actually have their stories heard globally. And finally, is to build the capacity of these youth in our communities to be able to act as stewards in a nature for climate movement. We have 3 pillars of work. The first one is knowledge sharing, where we host sessions like this one to exchange information, educate each other, and find or forge networks moving forward on how we can better deal with the environment. Then we also have storytelling, and for this we've been running a storytelling campaign over the past 1 year to just hear about, especially from young people in the world, on what we are doing and what solutions we are part of in our local context. And finally, we do have capacity building programs to just help increase the capacity of our team members, but also of the community we represent globally. Moving on to introduce the topic of today, and when we hear of intergenerational approaches to nature-based solutions, some of the key words that come up is highlighted on your screen, issues of, people, growth, solutions, just transitions, the continent itself, in this case, Africa, protecting nature, communities, elders, youth, and, all these positive aspects about coexistence rather, different generations. And further, how does this inform what actions we are involved in at the local level? And in the next slide, you're seeing there's still a repetition on communities, the intergenerational approach, protection and land restoration, climate action, management, biodiversity, and of course, the role of nature towards cushioning us and also helping us address our societal challenges. So with that in mind, and we recognize that the basis of our discussion today is that Africa is very rich and diverse in terms of the resource that we have, in terms of the geographical locations, but also in terms of the communities that every country in Africa hosts and our different cultures and natures around also. So with this richness, then we ask the question, so what are we doing to advocate and also embrace the differences amongst ourselves? And how are we working together in a different, diverse areas to really take on climate action and works on the environment? So we get to hear from our speakers from this point on for the next 30 minutes. And first off, we have Mr. Anthony Ocheng. Anthony Ocheng is joining us from Kenya and is affiliated to Nature Kenya. And professionally, Anthony is a wildlife ecologist. He's also an award-winning conservation photographer and an emerging filmmaker. And actually, I'll call him a filmmaker, a seasoned filmmaker, because I've seen some of the films he's worked on. Anthony is also a Jackson Wild Emerging Filmmaker Scholar. He's also our WWF Education for Nature grantee and a WWF Africa Youth Award nominee for 2018 on wildlife ecology. To follow and have a conversation with Anthony, please follow him on Twitter at TonyWorldKE, and also follow Youth for Nature on Twitter, and let's try to keep this conversation going on our Twitter pages. So without much time, let me give the floor to Anthony to take it away and share with us about his perspectives as an expert in the wildlife sector.
Hi everyone, hope you guys are doing well and can hear me well. Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. Just to make something clearer is that for Nature Kenya, I'm just the chair for the Nature Kenya Youth Committee. So Nature Kenya has different types of committee, and I currently lead the Nature Kenya Youth Committee. So that's the only affiliation I have with Nature Kenya. The other part I need to add is I'm the founder of Tony Wild, a platform that uses photography to link people and conservation science. and also biophilic conversation, where we inspire young African conservationists. So I know there's a slide that I presented to Paul, but I'll ask him to just share the slide, and then I'll do an introduction. So before Paul, you continue sharing the slides, I just want to talk about, before introducing the whole slide, just put it on the first page of the slide, kindly. So biodiversity is not just our way of life. It's actually our life. We mess up with it, it will kick us on the butt and show us who's the boss. My apologies on my choice of words. I will share with you nothing that you already know, but just put more emphasis on how young people need to support climate change solution and biodiversity. We are a generation where everybody wants to make positive change in the society. The biggest question is how. Most of us get stuck at how. Some of us go a step further and plant a tree. A few of us actually nurture the particular tree. Some of us make a positive change in one sector and a negative one on the other sector. So you might be thinking you're doing something on the other side, but you're doing another negative aspect on the other side. But young people are the most awesome human beings on earth, with a lot of ideas, innovations. But we need to ask ourselves, how can we do better to support biodiversity? Reflect on what the older generations have done before. See the impacts, negative or positive. Pick up the positives and learn from the negative ones. Ask yourself what went wrong and make adjustments of the negative impact. This is why we young people will be able to, this is the way we young people will be able to make change. But if we stick to doing things as usual and not going beyond what we see, we are going to lose. We need to read the facts and do an all-round evaluation of biodiversity issues, identifying the issues that affect society the most. So pick one that you can do. Biodiversity is complex. Biodiversity is complex. You cannot talk about biodiversity without mentioning people, land, local to national government, developers and donors. We young conservationists need to stop talking to ourselves and talk with other sectors that are part of the biodiversity but not taking biodiversity as a priority in what they do. Talk to an engineer, talk to a business person, talk to a market vendor, talk to somebody else within the society who is not really that much connected with management or creating awareness of conservation. So the question I ask myself is, how can I make my mom, dad, brother, or sister, or my friend understand the importance of conservation as the way they would understand the importance of a pilot or a doctor? So I urge, let us go local or go global once, and go global once your community has understood the importance of conserving biodiversity. Then we will be achieving the main goal of making everyone a conservation philanthropist to support climate change solutions and biodiversity conservation. So I do my part by addressing the communication breakdown definitions on understanding of the importance of biodiversity conservation. I do this by simply combining a combination of my passion, which is wildlife, and obsession for photography and film. And I do this mainly through the following program. So Paul will be going through the slides, and I'll talk about each and every 2 or 3 slides as you go along. People define wildlife in Africa as mostly the big 5, or they'll technically say it's meant for tourism. But the truth is, the definition of the importance of wildlife is actually for sustaining the ecosystem. We remove wildlife from the equation of an ecosystem, we are going to lose. So how do I make how do I help making my society understand that even the birds they see around flying around are actually important? So I decided to start using birds images. So there's a project that I do called Traveling for Birds. So you'll see a couple of bird images moving down with Paul. So just the next slide. So birds images are actually very when you take images for me on my behalf, I try give the birds a personal effect so that anybody else can relate with them. So images play a very critical role. I also highlight issues based on waste management issues on a project that I've been working on now for almost 3 years, documenting rehabilitation process of Nairobi River and also looking at how people are trying as much as possible to rehabilitate it. So next slide. And then also doing other projects ranging from supporting other organizations to document rangeland rehabilitation in the sense that how do you use images to actually monitor restoration of a landscape? And mostly using photography as a scientific tool is a technique called fixed point photography, where you can actually see the change of a landscape over a given period of time by taking pictures in terms of time lapse. Time lapses over a given period of either 3 months or 6 months, but making sure it's at a specific point, And I do this for a particular organization that works in the Amboseli ecosystem. And all I do is apply images so that these images can be used to be shared and can be used to not only just for communicating, but also provide data to those who are actually managing these particular areas. Next slide. Yeah, so a series of images, when you come up with a series of images telling the story using images, is that you need to give it a context. So this is Amboseli ecosystem, which is coupled up with wildlife and also livestock management with the people. And every single time there is a drought or there is overgrazing issues that come up, this is how the land looks like. This is an image that I took to just represent what might happen and actually what's happening right now in most areas. They're becoming degraded. They can't even support any plant life. So when you're doing photography to communicate wildlife issues, try as much as possible to start with an entry point. Next image. And then give it a human aspect or bring into context the relationship between one image to the next image. So the next image shows that there are actually livestock that actually depend on this particular landscape. With that image is how do we now relate these two landscapes, these two components of a particular landscape? There is livestock, and then there's the landscape itself looking dry and not really looking like it can actually support livestock. Next image. And then the people, because every landscape has people. As I mentioned before, you can't talk about biodiversity without mentioning people, governments, and the rest. So when you're doing these types of photography, you need to relate it with people. And then finally, next slide, just try and build it. So Paul, just keep going slowly by slowly, able to explain each as you go. So I'm trying to explain as much as what people can actually do. But then people are actually working hard to give a helping hand to support restoration programs. So this is an image I took earlier last year and one that I took this year. So you can see the difference between the landscape. And this is a project being done by an organization called Just Eat It, based in the Netherlands, but they support programs in Amboseli. And what they do is that they do what we refer to as earth smiles or bands. And on these bands, they do reseeding of grass on each and every band. So when it rains, water is being held on those bands. So after every given period, regeneration happens, and this is just trying to give the soil a helping hand, because understand a landscape that is really degraded. How do we really help it support it to be back to its, to be able to support livestock and humans and people? So these are two images showing how you can use photography to link to show difference in landscape change. And when you're doing this type of stories, you need to give what are the products that come out of these particular landscapes. We have milk from livestock, we have meat from livestock. So when you're documenting these images, you need to have a communicating eye. As much as I've done wildlife ecology, but I had to think about how do I communicate the science to another different public. Yeah. Next slide. So still on traveling for birds. So traveling for birds is more of trying to get people to understand that wildlife is actually at your doorstep. And using images for me is an easier way to communicate with somebody that the birds you see around you are actually wildlife. So one of the key questions I ask people is that imagine one day you wake up and there are no birds. Sounds. Let me just talk about sounds alone. You can't hear the bird sounds. And that is when you start having that conversation with somebody else who's not necessarily in the conservation field. Your vendor, your border person, or your taxi guy. Try talk to them, because we need to stop talking to ourselves. We need to step out and start talking to other people who are part of this particular ecosystem, and they have a role to play. So I use birds images as an easier way to actually get into sharing and making people understand that we need to conserve biodiversity. So different types of images, different approaches, give that personal touch to each and every image, so that when somebody looks at that image, they stick and look at them. But then don't just document the images for the beautiful birds. Document the people who are actually working in support of conserving this particular bird species. So work with ornithologists to get their story right, and then put them in one picture. You can tell that how passionate they are in actually conserving these particular birds. Next slide. And different scenarios, because in Kenya we don't have chimps, but we have them excluding in a particular place. They're there in Uganda, Rwanda, and DRC. But then how do I make people in my country understand that as much as we don't have chimps within the country, they are beautiful. They need to be conserved. You create that personal appeal. You show them that we are actually 98%. Us and human beings are 98% DNA is actually the same. So showing them the hands, how they're scratching, like the little details that when somebody looks at the image, you'll be like, yes, now I have a feeling exactly that the chimpanzee can actually need to be conserved in one or another. Next slide. So you document even the people who are doing conservation stuff. So you don't just limit yourself. So we're telling those particular stories is that you need to your target audience understand that wildlife does not just exist on its own. There are people who work to support wildlife, and you need to support the people working with wildlife or inspire them to continue doing that particular work. Personalities, bring personalities of those particular animals or what you're actually documenting for you to actually be able to uplift or inspire other people to do conservation work or become philanthropists in conservation. Next slide. Next slide. So I can just wind up with the last project. Still on chimpanzee. So next slide. And the people who are there are really amazing. So this is one of the most amazing projects, Nairobi River, and it's how can we get our rivers back? You know, somebody else seated in a town somewhere or working in an office as an accountant or a banker or a taxi driver, as much as they go through these particular areas, their interest may not be that as much unless you tell them using either pictures, films, or actually advocacy methods. You tell them that, do you know what, your behaviors of poor littering or not really asking your government to take precautions on how to manage waste is affecting the rivers and habitats within particular rivers. So when you take images and share them out and ask them to be used, it enables people to start relating with those images, like creating that personal effect with people is by using the images to actually get you that attention that you need to take action. Next image. The next one. The next one, I think probably last. So when you document such images, do not just show up, do not just show, back to the other image, don't just show the bad side of conservation or what people are actually doing. Show the positive end. This is a community group in Nairobi, in Korogosho slum, now currently called the Combat Green Solutions. They're actually working towards rehabilitating that particular riparian edge, and they've done an amazing. They're actually making a park just adjacent to Nairobi River. So having an image that presents that as much as the left side is having issues, there's an effort that people are trying to make is being done. Thank you very much, Paul, and I welcome for any questions. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony. That was quite the journey. You just took us through a journey of Kenya and how everyone should be a part of conservation and why we should not just be speaking to ourselves, and most importantly, why we should start with the simple steps, right? Start local and then go global after you've already convinced and managed to work with local communities. So I think that is a very key point that you're already bringing in, and just trying to understand the biodiversity around us, the landscapes around us, how do they impact us, and how is the human interactions with nature around us also helping inform what actions we can take for the environment and also for the climate crisis. So thank you so much, Anthony. We really appreciate your brief presentation. And people, please feel free to make good use of the chat box again, asking your questions, your comments, insights. We will retrieve them and post them to the speakers at the end of all the presentations. And at this point, I hand it over to my co-moderator, who will usher in the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Paul. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Anthony, for the amazing presentation. Thank you for re-emphasizing the need and the fact that achieving and winning, combating the climate and ecological crisis will demand a climate champion and change-making champion of all of us, particularly young people. And thank you for pointing us in the right direction to take, and some of the initiatives that we can take to contribute to making this change possible. Paul, can you turn to the next slide, please, so I can see Mr. Derrick's biography. Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Derrick is a young climate and conservation actor from Uganda, and an environmental scientist by education, and the regional director for XDay, and is also the current national coordinator for the Uganda Youth Biodiversity Network. Mr. Derrick, we are happy to have you. You can speak to us now. Yes, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for the introductions. Derrick Mugisha from Uganda and National Coordinator of the Uganda Youth Biodiversity Network, which is also a chapter of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Global Youth Biodiversity Network is an international network of youth organizations and individuals from every global region who are united really together with a common goal of preventing the loss of biodiversity and preserving Earth's natural resources. So this is the main group of youth that that we present at the Convention of Biological Diversity. So it's the main youth constituency at the UNCBD. It's like the same with UNGO. Those who are familiar with the climate change discussions, you find that UNGO does the youth input or the youth strategizing or negotiating on behalf of young people at the United Nations framework to combat climate change. So the same kind of network is also here, and this is where I do my work with youth, and we really do quite a lot of amazing work because being a young person as well and having youth around me, and the youth can also they're from different fields. So you don't need to be an environmentalist to be able to join the GYBN. So I'll go straight to what the Ugandan team does. So Uganda Youth Biodiversity Network started in 2018, and this came from when the GYBN hosted the first African capacity building workshop, and then we were tasked that we need to go ahead and start up similar chapters in our countries, and as well strengthen this kind of network. Because one thing that youth need to know, if we're really going to conserve biodiversity, is to really ask for a space, is really to request, or not even to request, actually we have to be there, because the kind of space that we are talking about is a space that we can influence. Because as young people, as youth, as people seeing the future, those that are in school, those that are after school, all have a purpose to live in a healthy planet. So we really need young people to be part of decision-making processes, to be part of implementing projects, to be part of capacity buildings, to also be part of national delegations, because at times I think the best way to empower young people is actually to give them the platform, to show you what they have. So that for you just have to give them more platforms to be there to show what they can do, to ask for their firepower, and also to ask for their decisions. What do they think? And that's what I think that we can do. So as a chapter, we do quite amazing work. Maybe if just to show you how we do our work in policy. We have a couple of policy engagements. Like what you can see on the screen is you see that so many young people there are really discussing about the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, because we all know biodiversity has a long-term plan by the United Nations, or countries that are parties to the United Nations Convention of Biological Diversity. And this long-term plan is where governments that are parties have to commit, or they have to come up with plans. They have to come up and say, this is how we can all work together, or so it's not mandatory that it's a must, the government has to do that. But if you're party to that, if you're party to the CBD, then you're tasked to implement what we call the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. And it's picked from what we call the Global Biodiversity Framework. So this year actually is, they term it as the biodiversity super year, because all engagements, if you saw what the World Environment Day, you saw what happened on the Earth Day, you saw what happened on the different other days, we were all emphasizing action has to be on the biodiversity, because we are losing, from what you saw from the IPBES report last year, it showed that we are losing 1 million species. They're all threatened to extinction. And as humans, as a race, we cannot really accept this to happen, because it's really tasked to what we do, to our practices. It's really tasked to us, to what we really do each and every day, to our businesses that we're setting up. And now we really need to dive in to what really the young people can do. So maybe you can move to the next one as well. Yeah. So talking about the topic that we really had the hosts come up with, the intergenerational approach. So as the GYBN, as a core youth team that is really pushing youth ambitions, we are really tasked to mobilize as many young people to come and give input, We also trust that we can share spaces with our governments. But the first approach actually to intergenerational is that we need to appreciate that also young people have, something they can offer, because most governments do not actually accept that, a young person can maybe lead a ministry, or a young person can really lead a delegation, or, they can be invited. I don't know, there's some noise. Maybe, can we mute the person?
I'm doing this right away. Sorry, Jerry.
Okay. So I was saying, so the first thing that governments really have to do is to really appreciate that, youth is not, should not be talked about my age. Like if I'm, 20, 25, when you can't really do something. But I think it has to be according to capacity. If I'm a young person and I think I can lead a government, or I can lead a delegation, that's something that, sorry, I don't know whose mic is on. But okay. So I was saying it's youth is not just supposed to be about age, because all of us, actually, including presidents of nowadays, were once young people, and they know what when you're youth, you're so ambitious, you have the energy, you have the zeal to do this. So when we want to link the energy we have as young people to the conservation space, is actually the world needs young people to step up, because if you're talking about the future and we are not actually moving the future, then I don't know what we as young people are tasked to do. So the first thing that we have to do is actually even start with, even if it's a national election, you start asking leaders or demand leaders to have, environmental manifestos, because most of them have done really so much injustice to our environment, because it's not their priority. When they're making, when they're talking about their campaigns, they really talk about economy, they talk about, gender equality, these other issues, and neglect more on, on the environment and conservation. So this is something that we are doing back in Uganda. So we always have something called the Authorized campaign that, we always all come together as young people and stand together and say, no, enough is enough. We start petitioning parliament. We start writing letters to the president, telling him, you see, you're selling out a wetland, or you're negotiating a national park with an investor, maybe because of oil. Like you have seen stories that Uganda is actually looking at oil as a way for economic, growth. But again, you're talking about conservation and, thousands and thousands of people that are really employed in the conservation space, because tourism only in our country actually brings in quite a lot of, money that comes from, gate fees. There's so many money that come into tourism for the natural beauty we have as Uganda. But then our government, if they do not really appreciate it, that means they're going to really make blunders, or they will not actually value it. And you find that even they under budget it. So these are demands that young people can put up and say, if you're thinking about our future, if you really think, we're a generation that you really love and protect, because you don't really need a generation of your own kids that do not even have access to clean water, or, So in terms of biodiversity context, these are what, young people talk about. And looking at how GYBN really works and how it really does this, is that we always bring young people together. They're always giving meetings. They're always regional meetings that, youth really, attend, and they really share their views. So we have national chapters, and in Africa, actually, you find that we have so many national chapters that you really need to look for. Maybe you can mail me and ask me if you have a coordinator, then I could be able to, help you connect with one, so that you join up with your national team, because when we are all together, then, it makes work easier. It makes us advocate, it makes us, lobby, it makes us, implement all these projects we're talking about, because the old people actually will not just listen to us. They need you to come with a point. They need to come when you're organized. And that's what, we do. We empower young people on. Maybe we need to organize ourselves. We make presentations on international platforms. And, there are so many youth that are doing research. So they share their research papers. Maybe you need to guide one. We collaborate on different projects. Like now, Uganda and Kenya, we collaborate on so many projects. So, that's how we are taking on this intergenerational. So it's like we engage first as youth, and then again we start bringing in on, you know, the old people to as well, you know, guide us, because they have a lot of experience that we do not have. We could have the ambition and the energy, but we don't have the experience. So we have to learn from each other. And this is something that we can all, as African countries or global, you know, globally, and you know, every country can take up. So for us, how we task them, or how we measure them, is through the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, the NBS. So some countries, even, you know, recently, because we're now, before the pandemic, we were working towards COP, and most of them were reporting that they have not even, you know, implemented a half of the NBS, because NBS are always like 5 years or 4 years. And that is really what is killing us, is countries do not implement. And the gist of this, you know, webinar or, you know, conference, call it anything, is we really want to make sure we implement. So one thing we do is we need to start asking governments, like, what's wrong? They need to start telling us what's not working, because they will say funding, but again, they're taking funding into defense, of which we are not ready for wars. So is it that we really look at wars more than conservation, that brings money on a daily, or that is you know, empowering youth, or is that it's employing young people? So these are all the questions that we need to ask ourselves. And this is why young people now, you know, there's no more time that maybe you shall wait for more 5 years. The time for action is actually now. And, you know, it's better, you know, you do the little action than not do action at all. So in my global call to young people is, you have a lot of power within you. You have a lot of capacity within you to influence, you know, global discussions about biodiversity, about nature. You have the capacity to mobilize other young people, start up an initiative, join up an initiative. Youth for Nature is here, and all the other platforms are there. And let us, you know, make sure that we all stick together and work together as one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Derek, for that amazing presentation. And thank you so much for speaking to the need for inclusive decision-making process and change-making actions as well. We have come to understand and realize that policies, formulated policies, often fail to deliver on their objectives because they are not formulated according to need-based, because they are not made-based policies. So young people, because of our population, strategically positioned us, coupled with technical competence and knowledge, has your positioned us to also take a seat on the table. And thank you so much for speaking to that, and also for the amazing work that you are also leading and championing in Uganda. We appreciate you once again. I'm not sure Paul is on the call currently. I guess might have a challenge with his speaker. So we move to the next speaker that we have for today, who is also an expert in the climate and conservation space. And by introduction, Dr. Carol is a PhD graduate of Wildlife Science program from the University of Washington, D.C., Seattle. She's a conservation scientist. She's a researcher, and then she works to integrate the interaction, to promote interaction between human and then the carnivores. She's a 2016 awardee of the 10th Annual Environmental Leadership Award Bullet Foundation. She's also a top 40 women under 40 Sunday Monitor in Uganda. She's a wildlife conservationist. And we really can't wait to learn from you, Dr. Carol. Please, you have the platform.
Thank you so much. Are you able to expand the slides to make the PowerPoint presentation? Because they're yes, thank you. Okay. And thank you so much, the two previous presenters. That was very impressive. I miss home. I'm from Uganda. I'm right now living in Seattle, Washington, in the US. But I'm really inspired to see all the work that's going on back home in Kenya and in Uganda, and I eventually would like to work back home. I think I'm not a young person, given that in Uganda, everybody is below 30, 50% of the population. So I think there is way more young people, and I'm above 30. So I don't know if I categorize as an older person, but here I am ready to share with the people. And definitely encouraged by all your work. I'm going to talk very briefly about, I will not go into the details of my research because they've been introduced, but I will just talk about what's the role of researchers and scientists in trying to promote nature-based solutions for conservation. All I see is a gray screen for my presentation. So I don't know if something is happening to the PowerPoint or if I should share screen.
Okay, is it much better now?
It's just completely gray.
Completely gray.
Yes.
If you could, if you are able to share your own screen, I think that might be just better then.
Absolutely. Let me pull that up.
Then. Okay.
Okay. Just give me a second.
Oh, is it any better now?
Sorry, let me get back there. Can you go to the next slide? See if that works.
Hi, people. Sorry, I'm actually back. Can I just try?
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry about the
let me
trouble.
stop.
Sure, thank you for understanding. Just a moment.
Okay, sure. Should I go ahead?
Sharing it right now.
Okay, thank you.
You just started, right?
Yeah.
All right. There we are.
Okay, so my PhD research was about understanding interactions between people and carnivores here in Washington State. Previously, I've worked with different species. I worked with crocodiles in Uganda in Kidepo Valley National Park, and have worked with small mammals, have worked with reptiles, and different species. But now my focus was actually to try and look at both humans and carnivores can be very contagious. And as both Tony and Derek alluded to, nature conservation definitely involves people. So as a biologist, my background is in biology, I just felt that there was something missing between that link. And so in order to understand how can humans better coexist with nature, how can we reduce human-wildlife conflicts, and how can we just basically have a better interaction that helps biodiversity thrive, I chose to study more about understanding these interactions. Next slide. Okay, that's my background. That's a mountain lion. It was one of the carnivore species that I was studying. And this is, you guys know, hopefully I usually use this when I'm presenting here, but Uganda is in Africa, and this map of Uganda really shows the protected areas. And when I was studying the crocodiles in the northern part, they were rare crocodiles, actually a different species from the ones in the south. And let's go on. Next slide, please. Okay, so whenever I'm talking, whether I'm presenting in a class or talking to people, especially when I'm talking to young people and telling them about, as a conservation scientist, what does that mean? And as conservation, how have we evolved? I try to bring up this timeline where earlier on in the 60s and 70s, when there's all this big movement and Earth Day and this groundbreaking scientists were making all these changes, it was really about like nature and the species and how preservation should happen. But as we've continued and seen like how species are not just important for themselves, but are actually important for us and for ecosystem conservation, we've become more wholesome in including ecosystems at large instead of just species. And ultimately we involve people and nature, and as such you find that it becomes more and more an interdisciplinary approach than just a biology side of things. Hence my title, that it's more than biology. Next slide, please. So in Washington, where I was studying interactions between carnivores and humans, the carnivores which I was studying were large mammals. So there is smaller ones, but I was studying wolves, which are, bigger than wild dogs in Africa, for example, but they're canids as well. And then mountain lions, which are smaller than leopards, but have quite similar behaviors. They don't have spots, but they're usually living very secretly. It's rare that you see a mountain lion, and your camera may show you that, oh, there was a mountain lion where you just passed, just after you passed the place, but they're quite elusive. And in this study, in understanding the interactions, I thought, next slide. Oh, wait, keep this slide. So in this, on this slide, you can see that the places which have low population, the green places where most of the cows are, those places are also where agriculture and livestock production is taking place. So the red places is like here on the left side of the screen, that's where Seattle is, and that whole I-5 corridor, we call it, has all these cities. So most people live there. But people also live on the east side, but those people are usually like ranchers and farmers. And also the wildlife is mostly in those places. So interlaying the wildlife and the livestock production, hence the conflict. And also people go there for hiking. So there is like recreational activities happening there in those places as well. And so there is, while the population is non-dense there is actually more interactions with the wildlife, because humans are still there doing either their livelihoods or they are recreating there and just enjoying their lives, but wildlife also have to live there. So this was my mission, to understand these interactions. Next slide, please. And so in understanding that, instead of just going out and collaring all the animals and understanding just the biological side of animals, I instead decided to use an interdisciplinary approach where I used both.
Hello, Carol. Dr. Carol, are you still there? Hello, Dr. Carol, are you still there? Hello, Jilo, can you hear Dr. Carol?
No, I think she probably have a challenge with her network or something. I think as well.
I think she froze. I think she froze. So I advise that we do this. Let's just brush through. We get to the final speaker of today, and then Carol can just, if time allows, go back to her presentation. Sorry for that. I know it's a very important research in terms of carnivore. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So let me just move quickly to the final speaker. And our last speaker for today is Leonida Odongo. And Leonida is the co-founder of Akinawiri Africa. She's a Kenyan-based social justice enthusiast with a background in a BA in political science and sociology from the University of Nairobi. She's also a mentor of students in over 10 universities across East Africa, and also doubles as a writer on community issues to bring this aspect to the public domain. And you can follow Leonida on Twitter at Hakinawiri. And please take it away, rather, Leonida, and we shall get back to Dr. Caro if time allows, and then we get to the Q&A section. And please, participants, feel free to, again, make use of the Q&A section, drop in your questions and comments, and then after the presentation, we get right to the interactions. Welcome, Leonida.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. What I'm going to talk about basically is based on personal experience in terms of building a bridge between young people and elder people. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about the climate crisis and the food crisis that we have in Africa. If we look at Africa as a continent, we're going through multiple shocks. For example, you all know about the Ebola outbreak in West Africa and the ravaging impact that it had. There is the problem of disappearance of species. and this is as a result of clearing of forests and other forms of biodiversity. You've seen incidences where there's plantations emerging and people producing what they don't consume. And then, of course, you're seeing what our governments are doing in terms of promoting quick fix solutions to climate and food crisis. You're seeing that they're pushing for, currently we're having a lot of GM trials. For example, in Kenya, there was a push for GM cassava and also the GM cotton, which is called BT cotton. And of course, you're also seeing, like in water bodies, the reduction in levels of water, for example, and also you're seeing, for example, in Victoria Falls, the water level is reducing, and as you all are aware, that is one of the world's natural wonders. And then, of course, this is linked to international trade. There is a dumping of products because, as we all know, that Africa, in many instances, African countries are primary producers. So what happens is that countries in the West, what they normally do is that they dump their products, their finished products in Africa, and this too has implications because when you're a primary producer, it also means that there's an imbalance in international trade. Next slide, please. Hello. I just want to show you just a reflection when you're talking about nature's vigilance. The case of Kenya, you can see one side there's flooding. This happened in a place called West Pokot. It's within the Rift Valley region. And then, of course, you all know that the desert locust was a menace across 8 countries in Eastern Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan being part of the countries that were affected. And of course, with this, there was a lot of damage and losses for the farmers. And sadly, there's not been proper response in terms of compensation. And now with the COVID pandemic, all the attention has shifted to management of COVID. Nobody's talking about the desert locust, but you all know that they are still doing a lot of damage in different parts of the country. Next slide, please. Next slide. So even when you're looking at what is the connection, for example, between food and climate crisis, and how does agroecology link this up? One thing is that I'd like to say that agroecology is a form of food production that works in tandem with nature. It creates a balance between the ecosystem, between land, trees, as well as existing animals. And agroecology can also be defined as a practice and as a science, as well as a movement. And with agroecology, there is a push to diversify crops, for example, growing different genetic, ensuring biodiversity through growing different species of products of farm produce. And it's also about understanding how much, for example, your land can accommodate. And it's also about using natural resources as opposed to using synthetic fertilizers, which interfere with the fertility of the soil. And with agroecology, it's also about building resilience. For example, if you carry out agroecology-related practices such as biological pest control, it means that you're not killing the pest, but you're like sending the pest away from your farm to other places. And this can be through, for example, growing crops like the neem tree, which research has shown can repel up to 200 species of different pests. And with the neem tree, when you link it up with agroecology and biological pest control, what happens is that you grow it on the border of your land, so that as a repellent. It means that it chases away the different pests that may have interfered with your crops. And of course, also in agroecology, you also plant you plant attractants, those ones that attract, let's say, for example, bees, insects that are positive, that contribute, let's say, for example, to pollination, for instance, the butterflies and the bees. Next slide, please. Now we're going to be looking at nature-based solutions and what is, before we go to nature-based solutions, maybe we can just delve deep a bit into agroecology and of course look at what are some of the principles. I'll just be very brief in this. So when you talk about promoting favorable soil conditions, this comes in, for example, when you use composting, you use organic manure in order to improve your soil fertility. It's all about, for example, growing legumes to fix nitrogen back into your soil. And you see in this one, you're not using any chemical fertilizer that has a negative, that is, will have potentially have a negative impact on your crop, but you're using, you're putting additives that are actually good for nature. Then when you talk about enhancing biological interaction, this basically looks at how, for example, how do insects, for example, pollinators, link up with your crops? You know, like when you're growing diversified crops, it means that you're going to be having more pollinators on your land. And research has shown us that areas where they use a lot of chemicals are the same areas where they have high rates of bees dying. And we all know that, for example, in Africa, we cannot be able to self-pollinate. We cannot be able to pollinate. We cannot be able to zone our land. Sorry. So it means that the more chemicals we use, the more bees and other insects that are pollinators are going to die. And sadly, in some parts of India, as a result of overuse of chemicals and death of pollinators, farmers were pollinating by hand. Just imagine if you have 20 acres and you're doing pollination by hand. It's very, very tedious. And when you talk about diversification of species of and genetic material, basically this is all about bulking existing crops. For example, in agroecology, we have something called seed banking. And what is happening is that species of seeds are disappearing, and part of it is because of multinational corporations, which come up with, which are even using legislations to force countries to put in place laws that allow for importation and laws that allow for GM products. And you, like in the East Africa region, there's the East Africa Seed Bill, and there's also something called ARIPO, which is a harmonized seed laws for 17 English-speaking countries. And sadly, all this is being done to create a conducive environment for multinational corporations like Monsanto, Syngenta, and the rest, so that when they come doing their marketing, the same marketing they do for their chemicals in Kenya, for the chemicals and the seeds in Kenya, for example, they can use the same marketing strategy to do it in Southern Africa, so they don't have to do a customized marketing strategy. And so for them, it's cheaper in terms of economies of scale. Then still on, maybe you can just go back to the other slide, please. Previous slide. Hello? Mutuku, you could go to the previous slide.
The
Thank
one
you.
on 20 post.
Yes.
Okay. Sure.
And then still on just trying to explain the relationship between agroecology and external resources. Basically, with agroecology, you use what you have. So it's about choosing what is available on the farm and not going, like, for example, to the agrovet to get your chemical fertilizer and getting your seeds. And still on this, that's where we do indigenous seed banks and having farmers share and save seeds so that they don't have to go to the agrovet season after season to buy the seeds. And then also something that I need to point out is that when these companies are making this making the GMOs, what they do is that they insert something called the terminator gene in the seeds, so that the farmer can only plant that seed for one season. That is one reason why you find when you talk to farmers, they tell you our crops are not, they're not maturing fast enough, or they're not, we can't replant them again. This is because what the interest of the multinational is only on profit. You can move to the next one. Another thing is discussion that I'd like to bring to the fore is regenerative agriculture. It's all about basically giving life back to where it's lost. For example, basically it looks at soil, because when you're talking about food production, the first place that gets destroyed is soil, and soil determines the amount of yield that you're likely to get, either as a farmer. It also determines the type of food that you get as a consumer. And one thing that I want to point out when you're talking about regenerative agriculture is the destruction of biodiversity is interfering with land, it's interfering with soil. And another thing is that, for example, discovery of new natural resources. You've seen what's happening in places like Hoima, in Uganda, in places like Turkana. When the natural resources are discovered, you find that biodiversity gets destroyed to pave way for this so-called development. Now I'll go to linking this nature-based solution and how I've been, as an individual, I've been able to engage young people in different spaces. And part of it is we do, first of all, is looking at existing platforms, and also looking at inventing our own spaces. So it's invited versus invented spaces. For example, could you go to the first one, please? The first slide before this, yes. So basically what you're seeing is 16 days of global action on agroecology, and what we did with a group of students from Catholic University of Eastern Africa, University of Nairobi, and Kenyatta University is we visited a community in Machakos to talk about agroecology. And basically, the other thing that we were doing, we started with soil, seeds, care for crops, harvest, post-harvest, and value addition. And at each level, we are having a political and technical education to enable the community to understand. For example, when you talk about soil infertility, who is responsible for soil infertility? And what remedies are there for the soil? And when I talk about practically, what we did during this session was to train farmers on how to test their soil. And we were looking at basic soil testing practices. For example, water retention capacity. How much water can your soil hold? Because we know that water is very important in photosynthesis. And if your soil loses water, it means that even the crops that you're growing on that soil cannot be able to be sustained. So we're training them on how to do basic soil tests using a piece of paper, a glass of soil, and a glass of water. Just pouring the water on the soil, and then seeing how fast the water is getting drained. And then when you're talking about seeds, that's when we have the discussions about seed banks, how to select seeds. And then you also talk about the market share of these multinational companies, and why it is important for farmers to be able to have their own seeds. What you're seeing next is just go to the previous slide. Hello, Mutuku, the first one. No, the bridging the age divide. Yes.
Sure, I'll go to the first one, but I also need to let you know that we are a bit off time and we need to rush through. I realize there's a lot to go through.
Okay, I'll just finish.
Sure, is that the one?
Okay, all right. Okay, this is, yes, that's fine. This is, okay, what you can see up there is Zinduka Festival. Zinduka means celebrating our East Africanness, and what we were doing there is basically talking about a movement building session on food sovereignty. And you can see we're having different participants of different ages. We also had a participant from South Africa talk about GMO. As you all know, that South Africa is one country that has adopted the use of GMOs in its food system. Move to the next one, please. Other things are community outreach, for example, and we also hold things that are called Tafakari forums. Tafakari is a Swahili word meaning reflection. Basically, it's going to a community and having discussion on a topical issue that's affecting the community. Other strategies are organizing trainings. This was a training conducted at Makerere University last year. And then we also had a visit to AFSA. AFSA is Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, is one of the largest networks dealing with food issues across the African continent. It has present in 50 countries in Africa. Next. Next slide, please. Butuku, next one, please. Yeah, and the other thing is youth engagement in different campaigns. For example, the Usawa Festival. Usawa means equality. And this is a contradiction because when you look at equality, you find that in Kenya, for example, there's a wide wedge between the haves and the have-nots. And why I brought in this was just to share with you that this is in Dandora, and that Dandora has one of the biggest, it has the biggest dump site in Kenya. Every day waste worth 850 tons find their way into Dandora. And sadly, people live in this community. Next. Next one, please. Another thing is to involve young people, for example, in regional meetings. These are students from the University of Nairobi, Kenyatta University, sorry. They're being engaged in a discussion on food. And in this particular meeting, they had over 200 participants present. And of course, then you can also have experiential learning across geographic borders. And this one we're doing with young people from South Africa, having them stay in Kenya and interact with other young people just to realize what are some of the systemic challenges that young people face. This can be a good strategy in terms of when you're talking about nature-based solutions and also enabling young people to learn from each other. I think I'll end there because we'll be sharing this. And lastly, maybe I just want to talk about globalization. Globalization, I brought it from two words, global and local. And as you can see on the slide, the slide number 14, basically this was the Climate Action Week. It was taking place in New York, but we're also having our own Climate Action Week in Kenya. And we were able to mobilize university students in collaboration with a network called Decolonize. And lastly, also involving young people in having young people visit food producers. Yeah, and on the last page, I've put a lot of resources. Those are some of the articles that I've written. You can, maybe when you share this, when you share it out, those are some of the articles I've written on food and climate. And it's all, you can also use article writing as a way of reaching out to young people. Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you so much, Leonida. Definitely not your fault. I realize that was a very in-depth account of what you're doing and things that young people can come and support other generations and also engage our communities when it comes to nature-based solutions and how also you linked agroecology to nature-based solutions in Africa. So I think that is quite an amazing aspect that you just brought to the table. And guys, thank you again for joining us. I know we are a bit over the time, but allow us to go back to Dr. Carol. We just began our presentation before things went south, and we understand these are connections issues. So let me just rush back until we get to Carol, and then she can do it briefly. Then we open the room for the presentations. I believe you were there.
Yeah, we're on this slide, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to the next one. So yeah, the previous slide was just showing the different disciplines that I use. Landscape ecology, where I was modeling landscape connectivity to see where do the animals move and how do the people live there. So does their movement increase or decrease conflicts? And then movement behavior was just coloring the animal and understanding, is it having young? Is it during breeding time that conflicts occur? Is it when they are mating, or is it any other times? So here is like both landscape ecology and then just the animal behavior itself. And then finally using human dimensions and using sociological approaches from the sociology discipline helps to understand people's perspectives. And when those are addressed, when they're consulted through stakeholder meetings, then that can increase tolerance of wildlife. So in the intersections, this Venn diagram from like earlier on, in the intersections, you can see that understanding the animal behavior, outreach and communicating that to the humans and understanding the human perspective can increase tolerance, which thereby improves conservation of species. Then understanding the human perspectives and the landscape ecology helps guide land use planners. And this is very important in where cities can configure for residential areas, or where they can just say, hey, when you go hiking or biking in this protected area, just be where there is carnivores. So that kind of interdisciplinary approach helps. And then finally, understanding spatial and animal behavior together it just helps us improve our conservation tactics, so that it's just not about the species, but actually at a landscape level where people live, where animals move, they can't just be locked. So in conclusion, I was just saying, as young people study different disciplines.
All right, okay.
Sorry, let me just mute that person. Sorry about that.
Okay, as young people study different disciplines, whether they are going into sociology, whether it's law, there is always a way to connect back to things. And environmental economics is also another part. Derek was mentioning, how do you rate tourism with oil production? That's something of an economic question, which we know that especially tourism and nature-based things tend to go much further and involve more people than a one-time off oil, which is tends to be very involved with corruption and the wealth going to just a few. So this is an economic question, not a biological question. So you find that in nature-based solutions, we really need all the disciplines, and whether the youth go into nature science or social science or law, economics, and everything in between, I just encourage them to still have an aspect of nature conservation in that, or work with people, fund nature conservation agencies appropriately, for we need nature to thrive even as a human species. Thank you so much for the opportunity to finish. I'm sorry about the connection earlier.
No, not at all. Really, we understand. I was a victim a few moments ago. So thank you so much, Carol. Again, yes. I like the perspectives you're bringing about how even the role of academia and researchers in ensuring that we're also keeping the next generation informed about the environments and around us, but also how can we engage all these different disciplines to ensure that we're not just working in silos, right? We're not isolating ourselves from the rest, and of course, then trying to find a better way forward. And at this point, guys, please just hold on again. I know it's been quite stretched, and I appreciate the fact that we've almost actually held everyone from the beginning up to now. So it's a big honor. And also to let you know, so we were not able to get to the fifth speaker, who was actually now representing the experts in the policy spaces and definitely working with WWF. So apologies, he could not join us today, so he really tried. But what we do right now, I would wish if we go straight to the Q&A section and open the floor to the participants to raise the questions to the speakers. I realized we did not have time to actually ask the speakers the guiding questions that we had already set, but I believe in all fairness for time, let us open the floor for the participants to ask and engage with our speakers. Elujilo, do you want to take this on?
Yes, I think we have a question in the chat box from, a second please. Yeah, from Begonia, who asked that he or she, I don't know how to place the pronoun now, is very much interested in nature-based solutions in urban areas in Africa, and also to see if there are visible options to tackle society challenges. So he or she is asking for an expert to speak to this now. So I would like to ask our presenters, our speakers, if anyone might be able to take this on. And I'd like to start with Leonida, since she talked with about the agroecology and the nature-based solution aspect of the urban. Yeah, Leonida, please, you have the platform. Hi, again.
Okay, with regard to agroecology, and when you're talking about solving societal problems, if, for example, I look at a challenge such as nutrition, with agroecology, it's all about diversification of species. So when you as a farmer, you're growing different species as opposed to monoculture, it means that even at the household level, you're going to be having your food is going to be balanced. If I link agroecology, for example, and economic aspect, agroecology as a source of income, you find that farmers spend more when they go to the agrovets to buy fertilizers. What about the farmer who does not have money? What about the farmer whose crop, for example, for the last season didn't thrive much? So with agroecology, what happens is that one, it rejuvenates, it brings back life to your soil, for instance. And when your soil is healthy, it means that even the food you're going to produce are healthy. And another thing I want to say about agroecology is right now people are becoming more conscious about the type of food that they eat. For example, we had an alert in Kenya. It was called the red alert, where supermarkets are using chemicals, are lacing food with chemicals and selling them so that they can increase the shelf life of the products. But when you look at agroecology, the consumer knows how this food was produced. And of course, there's the element of sharing of information amongst the community. For example, when they do seed banks, they can exchange and share with each other. I hope I've responded. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind response, Leonida. I'd also like to ask if any of the other speakers might also want to speak to this, possibly Dr. Carol.
Yeah, I actually realize Dr. Carol can also take that because there's an aspect she brings with experience in Uganda, as well as Anthony, who's actually worked on restoration and also rehabilitating of urban rivers and ecosystems, and as well as Derek, who is working with the youth movement. So maybe they can just do a brief one, then we get to the remainder of the questions. Thank you. Anthony, do you want to take it on, or Dr. Carol, or Derek, you will still around?
Sorry, please ask the question again. I must have missed it.
Sure. No, the question was actually, if someone from Begonia was asking, they are interested in nature-based solutions and urban areas in Africa. So just the need to see how feasible nature-based solutions are in order to tackle societal challenges. So she was asking if any of you have experience in that and how you can connect. So I hope that based on your experience, you can also share something and also share with for him.
Yes, absolutely. There is space for nature-based solution and nature conservation in urban areas. It's a whole field called urban ecology. And there is a whole, there is suburban and all these other things, but urban ecology right in cities, there is a whole field about that. They tend to study a lot of bird species, which are managing to be generalist and thriving with high rises. But then there is also issues that I think it was Anthony showing us about river reclamations but river restorations and nature restorations within areas. Right here in Washington, there is a lot of, and I think many cities in the US, there is a lot of focus on having green spaces, and they're not just for beauty, but they actually do provide ecological services, including like the ability to, as humans, psychologically and through our evolution, we need nature. So the ability to access these green spaces improves our physiological and sociological well-being. So that's a part also that really involves establishing and studying urban green spaces is definitely an urban ecology side of things. In my work, when I was talking to ranchers, while they live in rural areas, some of the economic incentives that I was suggesting to them involved marketing products to urban areas and having these products certified as wildlife friendly areas, or say predator friendly beef, or predator forest friendly coffee and that sort of thing. There is bird friendly coffee. So if these products, these agriculture products from rural areas are grown in areas that are conserving nature well, could they be marketed in urban areas for higher price? And that's the people who are living with nature have an incentive to protect nature, while the people in urban areas are actually supporting nature by giving this extra payment for these natural products and agriculture products. So that's another component of where we can involve the urban areas in this nature conservation. So yeah, that's my 2 cents, and I'm absolutely glad to follow up on email. So over to Anthony to add on to that.
Yeah, actually, thank you for that. And as Anthony is answering that, there's another question coming in, and someone is asking, I believe, we don't know name though. So the question is, how do we enhance intergenerational dimensions in conservation by taking advantage of the technology advancement which seems to have come of age during this period? I believe COVID-19 period. Yeah.
Since I'm still on, should I just give my 2 cents and then let go to the next person? It's a very brief one, and sorry, I know in Kenya you have like summer sauce and this sort of thing, where in technology, Microsoft has developed this, especially wildlife ecology, where we use a lot of photography and a lot of video, and you get a whole ton of data which you cannot analyze as one individual. So there is a lot of artificial learning which is being used, but still it's people who actually have to go through this data, looking at a computer to make sure that the algorithms get accurate. Summer Source was one such organization which was recruiting young people from Africa. They had in Gulu and Nairobi, and teaching them more IT skills so that they can be more helpful. So there is definitely room for all this technology development, young people, and nature conservation.
Thank you. I cannot like agree with you more. Maybe we have more updates and insights from Anthony.
Thank you very much, Paul, and the rest of the speakers. So I'll just drop in 2 or 3. So regarding urban nature-based solution, it's always just about figuring out the behavior of people living in the urban areas. And for me, I'll take it from a point of view is that we need to figure out as young people how to reach out to other people who are not necessarily in the conservation space, who are working in banks. How do we tell them that they can actually pay for other services? Or let me talk of payment of ecosystem services. For instance, asking every office or every building to calculate the amount of water, electricity they use, and then use that to actually support conservation initiatives. The thing is that we are struggling to, as young people, we need to start pushing for the urge of having everyone to be a conservation philanthropist, regarding from where you're coming from, regarding from the background, regarding whatever you're doing, but being able to support conservation, because we need to agree and be on the basis that biodiversity is life. we mess up with it technically, it's gone. So that's just, we just need to package that particular communication really, really well, because that society we are talking about, we are part of that society. We are the solution. We need to get into that society and push for people to change their behavior towards the poor littering, because as much as we can say that the organizations outside here are producing so much plastic waste, but they're following the laws. And how do we change the laws? How do we make people do proper littering? Because sometimes I feel, as much as we talk about plastic waste, we need plastic, but at the same time, we need to manage that plastic. But if our people do not understand that, it becomes difficult. So especially in urban areas, we need to really communicate and make urban people understand that biodiversity is everywhere. Because most of the communication that have been out there is, if you want to support conservation or you want to enjoy nature, you'll have to travel for longer distance to go somewhere else, to go to a green place, which is okay. But you can do more than just traveling to green places, from using water properly, from electricity in our homes, and everything else. So how do we package that information to them? And technology comes into play, because every young person right now, most of them have phones. So how do we make TikToks videos? How do we make Instagram stories? How do we convert audience has done to resonate somebody else in that particular space? So to communication and understanding about these particular terms. We as scientists or practitioners understand this, but ask yourself, does your mom understand this particular part? How do I make my best friend who's working in the bank sector understand that poor littering is wrong? We need to use technology as much as possible, but also look at the dangers of technology, because any information that is not true alters the different perspective of how people will analyze information. For instance, a case is in the course of, I think this week or last week, there's an image that cropped up from Nairobi National Park. Nairobi National Park is one of the cities in Nairobi, or let me say the only park in a city. And this image had lions, and it had an excavator next to it. But from a point, I do understand that every park needs to be done like engineering, road engineering at some point. But somebody else who does not understand wildlife management will not resonate like that. We think that the park is actually being taken over. And we need to just figure out our communication patterns. To be honest, and I'll end from this point, we need to repackage our communication, especially from the science world, and make sure everyone understands that biodiversity is not for somebody. It's not for me alone. It's for me, you, and my next generation to survive. Thank you.
Wow, what a point to add to that. And I agree with you, like behavior change is as much as needed as the technologies, and also the need to reach out to people, right? Not just working and talking with environmentalists. We need to talk with people outside of conservation, and in urban centers, we need to bring everyone on board rather. So sorry, let me just mute someone who is speaking, interfering then with this.
Could I also react some?
Yes, Derek, sorry. Yes, Derek, please.
Yeah, so I would start with the one from the urban conversation. I'm part of a forum for cities for nature, and these are some of the questions that were coming in, that governments do building and all those things, construction, roads, so many things that are happening. But when you want to look at biodiversity and cities and urban development, you have to realize that people in urban centers actually want to settle, chill out in a very cool place. So they really want to enjoy the fresh air. But so it's actually up to when you tell them the benefits that they'll really, So most of the cities that we have in Africa actually do not have parks, and you find that when you're watching movies, I like reading from movies, because people in movies really do a lot of thinking that, what exactly would, so they show you a city full of trees, some part of the trees and the water, and how people, come and chill out at a place and enjoy taking the pictures. They do the weddings from there, and they do everything. So the best way we can really, influence the urban and the biodiversity is to tell them the benefits, and the benefits have to be personal. When you tell someone a solution that is personal to them, like maybe fresh air, you can take cool pictures in a place, in a town, maybe after office, you can go take a picture or chill out and have a meeting. There's a way they read so fast, and they really want to be part of the action taking. The other bit of the solution, maybe like nutrition, we emphasize a lot on people in urban areas to do some urban gardening. Using so many, different types of plant species. For example, if the nutrition level, maize, and you can maybe mix maize and maize, cassava, and so that you don't only feed on one thing. But now we're eating pizzas and the rest of the things that aren't being nutritious. That's why it's easier for us to say, let's kill out all the forests, let's kill out everything in urban town, because you're not really seeing what's happening. But according to the report of nutrition last year, we're having millions of people that are malnourished, and this is affecting your education. It's affecting our health. That's why you get sick nowadays. In case that's why now you see the coronavirus is here, and they tell you need to have immunity, but immunity is from local food. So we emphasize more of eating, local food. But now in urban centers where you don't have a lot of space, you can practice urban gardening and maybe have your simple garden that can give you the needed nutrition for your body. The other one on technology is when you look at the technology happening now, there are drones that now are being used in national parks, fly over, so that you don't really inconvenience the animals, trying to take pictures, trying to take videos, or you want to capture a scene, maybe of a lion and the other one fighting, those are also good scenes for those in conservation. Is now there are so many drones, you can put it up so it does not affect the ecosystem or the habitat where the animals are. So the other one are apps. So we have a city, it's called Science, it's a science app, and Citizen Science app. So you can use an app. Maybe you want to know about a species, you can just take a picture of it. Maybe you want to add a name, because we want to really learn a lot about the species, or want to get to know new species that we have in our community. So that's one way. There's an app. You can design an app that can help you with mapping the trees you've planted, where they are located, and also maybe the name or the plot where you've done it. And it's easier for you when you're lobbying for your stakeholders that you have planted trees. You can show them, that's the map site on the app. Like, this is where we've planted trees. So these are just innovations, and technology. You can just think and innovate something that is going to make conservation, thrive, and also make it easier. So technology is there to make things easier, not to distract. But when you start making technologies that distract nature, that means you're equal to a poacher. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And I agree with you. Thank you, Derek, for bringing that point about how, especially we young people, are very innovative and creative. And, the internet and technology is in our favor at least. And if we can embrace it and try to use it meaningfully, or rather proactively, then we can actually help bring some of these solutions home. And now I'm seeing a couple of questions coming for Dr. Caro, and one for Leonida, another one for general speakers to respond to. But you'll have to pardon me that I want to, I'll be a bit strict on time. I know we are actually just way above the time limit, but we'll try to bring it to a close in the next 20 or so, rather actually 15 minutes. But for now, let me give the space for Dr. Leonida, Dr. Carol, to respond to this. Maybe briefly.
Yes. I wanted to say that I think Dr. Carol already replied to the questions in the group chat, and I think Leonida as well also already answered that. So for time, I think if we can, since everybody also solved that, so if we can keep that, I think that might be best for time. If Dr. Carol and Leonida is very much all right with that, of course.
I'm not sure I had that. The suggestion is?
Okay, I said Dr. Carol and then Leonida herself. I think they already replied to the questions asked in the chat box here. But
Okay.
if they still want to give voice to the words they typed, it's totally all right for time.
Okay.
If they are happy with it, I think we should move forward. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. If they have, if both of you have actually responded in the group, in the chat box, good, good, and better for us all. And just to wrap it up, I really appreciate our speakers for today, for having created the time to just come and join us and to make this an active conversation. Sorry for having taken so much time, but I believe it's for the cause, and we are dedicated to the cause and to seeing how Africa is soaring and how actually we have so many experts within us, and we just need to speak with each other. We need to speak with people outside of our disciplines, and we need to embrace each other's efforts to protect our environment and to make a better case for nature. So I think maybe we give the speakers one last take to give a final message, and then I'll do the final slides, then we can sign out. Starting with Derek. Derek, do you wish to give your final remark?
Yeah, so finally, I will just talk about that we need to really stand up for nature. We need to rise up for nature. You know, we always do webinars, we do conversations, we do so many things, we discuss, but things remain on the core. So it's up to us to extend the actions. If we do not do the actions, it's equally that we didn't attend any webinar, or it was really not important. So at least what I want to see after this webinar, after this call, is to see each individual taking actions, individuals demanding action, you know, innovating, you know, connecting, collaborating, and the last final thing is every birthday you have, please make sure you plant a tree, you know, to remember that age. You can plant as many trees based on your age. If you're getting married, you know, just make nature your friend, love nature, live nature, and preach nature. At least you become a great pastor, great prophet, great everything. We're talking about nature solutions and how nature is important to us. Thank you.
Wow, wow, what a punchy way to end it. Thank you so much, Derek. And you just presented the Pearl of Africa with a very nice exit point. Next on, Leonida, you want to give your final remark, please?
Okay, what I want to say is that one, as it's been great being in this space, and I also look forward to further engagements, further conversations, and further exchange. And the other thing is that I want to say is that the future is now, so we can't wait to improve on the future. We have to start now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a brief way. And yes, the future is now. Let's work on it. We cannot wait for it. We have to start working on it. Anthony.
Thank you, Paul. So mine is very, very simple. We as Africans need to start embracing our passions and make sure your passions have a social positive social change in society. If it's environment, if it's health, you have fun on whatever you're doing. Because at the end of the day, as much as we all go to school, or most of us we have the opportunity to go to school, let's not go to school for ourselves. Let's go to school for the community that actually took us to school. So that's all at hand. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's a heavy one from a big brother. Thank you, Anthony. And finally, last but not least, Dr. Carol, who is pretty much on the early times in our country.
Yeah, it's morning here. I really appreciate having been invited to this forum. It's great to see all the different aspects, components of nature-based solutions that have been addressed here, from photography, biophilic conversations, talking about food. Leonida, that is a very important topic, especially for Africa, where we could grow food all year round, yet we still get the most incidences. And everything that has been spoken in between, the work that Youth for Nature do, and the work that the Youth Biodiversity Network, Derek, in Uganda, that you do, it's all really, really good. It's very hopeful. Thank you so much for doing this. I would like to end by saying that we all don't have to go into nature science or environmental science disciplines in order to care for nature. We should definitely do it in our different sectors, in our different disciplines, in the different careers that youth choose. Whether you're in banking or in whichever discipline, if you cannot personally be involved, volunteering your time, plant a tree, like Derek said. That's a good culture which we had in Uganda that has been lost in, like now young people like to take Instagram pictures instead of like planting a nice tree. I mean, take an Instagram picture planting a tree. That will work. You get both worlds. But then donate money to Biodiversity Network, Youth for Nature, if you cannot put in your time. Advocate, sign petitions that tell governments not to sell nature for short-term, very corrupt projects. All in all, my conclusion is this is an interdisciplinary, an inter-career, and everyone mission, because nature benefits are physiological. Like just by being humans, we need nature to thrive and to be the species that we are meant to be. Like Jane Goodall says, if we don't change our ways after COVID, the human race is finished. We absolutely need to take this seriously in whichever careers that we choose, especially for the youth who are indeed the upcoming saviors of this world. Thank you so much, Youth for Nature, and thank you so much, everybody, both the panelists and other people who have attended this webinar. It's amazing to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Carol, for that. And like I agree, yeah, we need nature. Like nature is a life support system, and we cannot afford to lose that right now. So thank you so much for joining, and also thank you so much to our participants for having created the time and dedicated your energies to listen in and overstretch with us. And for that, we really say thank you. Thank you so much. The conversation does not end here. Please sign up on Youth for Nature on our website, just like www.youthfornature.org, and follow us on our social medias, as you can see on the screen, at Youth on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We go at Y for Nature, and then feel free to drop us an email at hello@youthfornature.org, and we will be able to follow through and see how we can engage further. A final announcement from me before I give room to my co-moderator, my amazing co-moderator. So this is just not, it's not the end of it, especially not the end of it at Youth for Nature. We plan to actually have a series of these dialogues, and we plan to have at least now more flexibility to give speakers more time and participants more time to actually engage and be able to answer all the questions. So please be on the lookout on our social media platforms, and let's definitely converse and discuss on how best we can collaborate and chat a better way moving forward. So thank you so much for me. It's been a pleasure co-hosting. It's been a pleasure just being a part of this amazing discussion. Now over to you, Elujilo, and I'm just stopping my screen share now.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you so much to our amazing speakers. Gone are the days when they tell us that youth are the leaders of tomorrow. I believe after this discussion, we all know that our leadership potential has started already. And it's so amazing to see the change igniting work that every young people out there are doing to change the narrative of the planetary emergencies. This has just given us the push to do more in this space. And for every best practices that has been shared today. So I want to encourage the participants to ensure that they contribute to this change-making process. We have to start somewhere. It could be in your home by growing what you eat by yourself in an environment-friendly way. Could be starting in your community, could be starting in your state, could be starting at the national level. So I want to encourage that you do what you must do to contribute to this change-making space, because as young people, it is our future that we are driving at, and it falls on us to make sure that we push the political and then business leaders to take urgent and deliberate action to implement this change, while we ourselves contribute to the change-making process ourselves. So thank you so much for engaging with us in this space, and we look forward to engaging more with you in the near and far future. Thank you so much again.
All right. Like the youthful people we are, even if we are older, let's just celebrate for nature. Let's smile for nature. Let us continue the conversation in our communities, and let's not give up hope. Please, let us do things that we do for nature, because she's always been on our side, but we've betrayed over the time. but now we have the chance to go back, resonate with nature, and heal ourselves, you know, while healing. And I think that is a good way to also end it from my side. It's been a pleasure. Feel free to hop off. We look forward to seeing you in the future and to interacting more. And thank you so much. I can see all the conversations in the chat, but bye-bye for now. Enjoy the rest of the days. Bye.